kind of funny that happens in psychology, and I don't know the extent to which this is true of other fields. But in psychology, people will sometimes assume that if you study a topic, it's because you must have personal experience, and that personal experience drives you to want to study something. In my case, I was applying to graduate schools, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So I was assuming when I was an applicant, I'm going to be a clinician, I'm going to provide psychotherapy, I'm going to provide counseling services for my profession. And I was really interested in providing counseling to families and couples. So I started looking into labs that offered training in couples conflict and couples counseling, and very few researchers, I found out, actually study couples conflict alone. They study couples conflict, but something specifically like intimate partner violence was really common. So I got into a lab where the researcher, my advisor, studied intimate partner violence, and as a first-year graduate student, I'm doing all the literature review that you do to get up to speed to what's going on in that field. And I noticed that I had a lot of misconceptions that were probably common misconceptions about partner violence, and that there was a lot of work to be done. Things like gender differences in partner violence, the extent to which batter's intervention actually works, especially things like batter's intervention for women, because women are sometimes referred to batter's intervention. And for a long time there was almost a suppression of research into women's violence, seen as a type of victim blaming. And unfortunately, as a result, we really don't know a lot about what to do with women when they're referred for treatment for their own violence. And we have 3 studies that are officially approved ongoing studies. We've just started one in the last couple of weeks, so we're really focused on that one. That's a study that is looking at the way that men and women self-report their use and their partner's use of aggression in a relationship under different conditions. So comparing reports if I complete a survey anonymously online versus doing an interview. Another study, and that's the study that we're really putting most of our effort into right now. We have another study it's a continuation of a study that I started under one of the summer grants from a year or 2 ago. And that one's an online study with students. And the third study is a study that's kind of gotten put on the back burner as we've started this more recent study. But that's a study of couples from the community, this third study. The couples, they'll come into the lab, and they're couples that all have some history of relationship violence in that particular relationship. And they come into the lab, and we ask them to do a variety of things. They fill out an extensive questionnaire. We have them engage in a communication exercise that we record. We actually video record it so that later we can go through and do some coding. We code their emotions, their facial affect during the discussion. And then my research assistants will interview each partner separately about things like violent incidents in their relationship, actually getting descriptions of them. So there was a grant in 2010 and 2011. They were really very different studies. The one in 2010 is officially finished. That was a study where we were collecting data from men and women out at an agency in the community, and that agency is charged with providing batter's intervention to pretty much anybody in the area who gets court ordered. So if a person would be arrested on a domestic violence charge and required to do batter's intervention, this would be the agency where they would go. And they were nice enough to let us come in and describe the research to their participants, and we would actually go out to the center there and conduct the data collection sessions there. And so research assistants, again, they would travel out to the agency. They would describe the study to the men and women. And those people who were interested in coming in, the research assistant would meet with them. They would give them the surveys, and then they would do the interviews with them individually about their relationship. That study was focused largely on looking at motives for violence and how men and women might be motivated differently or similarly, especially the role that control played, the extent to which my violence is motivated by a desire to control my partner. And so there was a paper that came out. This was a paper that was published, I think, in 2011 that came out looking at gender differences in motives, and it was based on the research from that summer grant. The other summer grant, that was the 2011 grant, that was a study done with students here on campus from the intro psychology participant group. And in that study, it was done entirely online. Those students were asked to report on different kinds of aggression and in different contexts. So they were asked to report on physical aggression and psychological aggression. They were asked also to report on more what we call covert forms of aggression, like relational aggression, spreading rumors or ostracizing a peer. And they were asked to report on different forms of aggression in the context of their peer relationships and in the context of a romantic relationship. And kind of the big goal of that study, and there's a paper that I'm working on now, was to look at the way that we typically divide the phenomenon or the construct of aggression. Does the way we typically divide that phenomenon, is it the same if we're talking about aggression toward a peer versus aggression toward a romantic partner? And so that study, we have quite a few participants, I think somewhere around 900 that have completed the survey. We're hoping to get a couple hundred more before finalizing everything. One publication that I'm really interested in is the one that I mentioned from this study, where we're still hoping to collect a bit more data. But that's a publication that I'm interested in because it would really be the first publication of mine that is not just about the context of the relationship. So it looks at peer and partner violence both. Another goal that I have is to continue collecting data from couples, from the community. It's really valuable data, but it's difficult to get. It's difficult to get the participants to come in. It's a population that's difficult, to tell you, we're studying relationship violence. Will you come in and tell us about your relationship violence? That's tough to get people to want to agree to do that. The study, each session is very time consuming. It takes about 3 hours, and so that's a research assistant's time. But you can do things with couples data that you can't do with individual data. So I can look at two people's reports of the same violent incident. I can get corroborating reports about if I give the same questionnaire to two people in that relationship. So that's one goal that I have, is to really continue collecting data on the couples as opposed to just data about relationship violence from one person. Another goal that I have, I'm working on another paper, and this one is based on some research that I presented with a research assistant this year. It's looking at the relationship between attachment problems and aggression in the context of a romantic relationship. And then, let's say probably a third goal is not just the papers and studies that I have in mind now, but kind of a general goal would be to get some kind of external funding. So I'm hoping that having had the Purdue research grants in the last couple of years will help me get an external grant to support, especially to support some of that couples research, because there are costs, including costs of compensating for participants to come in for 3 hours.